Okay, let's begin.
Good morning, Patriots. You're listening to Political Pitchforks on AM 1280 The Patriot. I'm your host, Jeremy Munson, with co-host Susan Sjogren-Smith. And today's guest is Elliott Engen, who is running for State Auditor, statewide office in Minnesota, and one of the constitutional offices that will be elected next year. Elliott, welcome to the show. Really glad that you're running. We need someone who's going to be a great state auditor to really go after a lot of the fraud at the county level that's being disseminated, taxpayer dollars that are being wasted, and it's a really important role of the state auditor. So introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit about how you got involved in politics and your time in the legislature, kind of what you've been focused on.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun. Ultimately, I never once thought I'd get involved in politics. It was never on a bucket list. It was never something that I thought I could do. I thought you needed gray hair and individual wealth to be able to do so. But, it was really during undergraduate in college that I started to get a little bit more politically active. And I asked questions on a very liberal college campus that would not allow for any dissent. And that was at Hamline University, which is pretty funny because yesterday I was tabling with Turning Point there. And I started a Turning Point chapter back when I was in undergrad, and I thought I was the only conservative on campus. All of a sudden, 2,000 kids show up on an 8,000 kid campus. And what that told me is that there's an entire generation of conservatives that's ultimately not getting engaged and not speaking their mind because they feel as if doing so comes with ramifications socially, culturally, and they're going to be ostracized for it. And so from there, I got a little bit more involved. I worked as a assistant with the prosecutor's team in Ramsey County and Hennepin County, and then did some court operations associate work and watched how broken our criminal justice system is, and worked at an NGO as well. So that kind of gives me some insight as to how this fraud is being perpetuated. But then I decided to run for office and knocked 40,000 doors and made it happen in a very blue district. And so
you said that you worked for an NGO. I just want to clarify. It wasn't an NGO involved in the fraud, right?
No,
you said you learned how the fraud happened.
No.
Thanks for clarifying that.
I just understand how you can get around. Yeah, we don't want to break news with that.
Right.
At the end of the day, they did everything right, but they were also penalized for it because they weren't the donor class of the Democrats. That's who's getting all the NGO money.
Now, when you started this Turning Point chapter on college campuses, did you find that these conservatives, as you call them, that came to these rallies, were they interested in the movement because they want like less government, or because they were social conservatives, or can you describe kind of the majority of the people that were involved at that level?
Yeah, I think ultimately, while it's not monolithic, I think there's so many young Americans right now that are looking at our current system and they recognize how broken it is, how it's in need of reform. And we need people who are honest brokers telling the truth and seeking out integrity back into the system. And they want less government because of how broken it is. They don't trust politicians, and why should you? They're less trustworthy than gas station sushi at this point. But why would you vote for them to have more power and money and say over your life? They're like the annoying helicopter parent to a young kid, right? And so they wanted to start, just engaging in topics and discussions as to how we get back on the right track and how we get our compass back to due north. But through those conversations, you'll find disagreement, and that's healthy. You'll find independent-minded thinking on the right-hand side of things today, and the left is like a religion with no mercy. It really is either comply or you're kicked out. So, I think a lot of people were engaging simply because it was an honest conversation rather than just platitudes and talking points that are being thrown around like our classes were.
Right. We haven't spent much time talking about your campaign offline, but when I saw you announce your candidacy and I saw some of the criticism being lobbed at you because of your age, it reminds me that when you run a campaign, you have to understand what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. People are going to frame you. And, as a Republican, been involved in our politics now for 20 years, I know that every cycle we talk about how do we get the young people involved? How do we go after the youth vote? How do we engage more on college campuses? Yeah. And then when we have a candidate who is a millennial that comes forward that wants to run, then the criticism is, well, he's too young. Well,
Right.
I see your age as a strength and how to get out and get people involved and speak to the next generation of conservatives. How have you been addressing that criticism on the campaign trail?
So when I first got involved in politics, I saw being a Gen Zer as a liability. It was always, oh, where's this kid from? What does he know? Who's his uncle or nephew, or does he come from individual wealth? And none of those things are true. I just, saw a need for change and wanted to feel as if I wasn't just screaming at the moon about all of the issues that we face today. But over time, I've seen it become more of a superpower to be young in politics, especially when people have been in there for 40, 45 years, like Joe Biden. And they're unable to have the energy, enthusiasm, and kind of new outside the box visionary thinking as to how we approach politics. And I've always tried to do that. Am I perfect at it? No, but I think I'm speaking to a disenfranchised younger voter who otherwise feels as if the system is so broken, why even want to engage in it? There's no point. Well, now I think because they have a voice who's amongst them, a peer, a friend, in many cases, and I try to be very responsive to them when they're engaging with me online. They sense a level of trust there that maybe otherwise they wouldn't from a canned politician who's always using those talking points. And so we've seen a bunch of people reach out who have never once been involved in politics and never wanted to be, that now want to join our campaign team. And there's nothing more fun than that.
So I want to just quick say, as a part of that older generation, really hoping that we all are going to start looking more towards younger people who really, I think, people like you are the solution. And here you are, pretty new to the legislature. And just real quick, I'm just going to say the number of bills you've authored, the range of bills, right? Like local government units authorized to opt out of the Met Council regulatory jurisdiction. Hello. Wow. Thank you very much for that. First responders, protecting them from people who ignore the laws about their safety on the roads. Human trafficking task force. Yeah. I could go on and on. Here's how do I know you're not a total player? The PCR refund program repeal issue on the table. Thank you very much for that. What I'm saying is, here you are, this young kid to so many of us old people, yet you are raising issues that many of us were raising, years ago that everybody kind of gave up on. Here you are doing it, bringing it back, and putting that out for all of us to see that just because the government has been doing it doesn't mean they should be doing it. And we need to get back to our protecting our freedom and our liberty. And you're coming at a lot of these things that should never even been put in place.
100%. And once you explain it to people, they know that to be true as well. But I think so many within the political class who get in with good intentions ultimately end up becoming the same cog in the machine that they were originally trying to dispel.
Right.
Because you kind of have to go along to get along, and you have to maintain friendships, and kind of the you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours sort of thing. And I don't believe in any of that. That's not what we are elected to do. That's not how we got into this. That's not why I want to be in politics. It's just disgusting to me. And so we're trying to take nuanced ideas that are bringing integrity back to politics and bringing trust back to an institution of government that largely has none. And
some of us had,
bills,
I want to say something because you made a great comment about this desire for people to be friends. And I just want to say, some of us were fortunate that we had parents who taught us that a true friend tells you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And I think too often we confuse collegiality with a relationship in politics, especially. So just because you see somebody and you have lunch with them, you can be collegial. That doesn't mean they're your friend, right? And when we start to make these things personal, like we want to maintain this relationship as opposed to do what's right, that's exactly when we should anybody who feels that way should be resigning, and in my opinion, because that's not their job. And we're headed up on a break, but I think over this break, I want to have you thinking about, what exactly can you do as an auditor to protect the people from corruption. Anyways, we're headed to break, and we look forward to seeing you back here in just a few moments. Thanks very much.
Okay, let's begin.
Welcome back to Political Pitchforks. I am Susan Smith here with Jeremy Munson and Elliott Engen, who is running for state auditor. And the state auditor is a position that people often have no idea what that person does. We've had Julie Blaha has been in that role now, I think, for 2 full terms. And I think she has not helped educate people about the serious nature of this position. So I'm going to ask you, Elliott, you're running. Can you just provide the listeners with some basic information to help them understand why it matters to the people of Minnesota that we have an actual functioning auditor who does their job?
Yeah, so I think overall, if you take a look at Julie Blaha, what has she been spending her time on? It's been rolling over vans with White Claws and doing TikToks in the office. And for an $8 million budget that you can go and provide that investigatory coordination and help with law enforcement partners who are looking for that fraud, or working with federal partners, preventing fraud and calling it out, and truly being a watchdog and a guard dog over every single cent that is appropriated by the legislature and doled out to these nonprofit groups who are largely responsible for this fraud. She's done none of that. She's done absolutely nothing. The last time that she invoked the word fraud on any social media platform was in 2022, and it was in reference to Iowa. So that's what our current state auditor is up to. And I think ever since we announced on October 23rd, we've broken fraud stories. We've been on the ground, boots on the ground at these sites, looking to see if they even exist, or if they're nothing other than shell companies who are receiving millions of dollars of the working class's money. Ultimately, we're going to raise the bar for what the office does. We're going to refuse to simply abide by that chattering political class's narrative that we can't do anything because statutorily we're only going to be looking into county and municipality funds, but also we're going to allow those same counties and municipalities to bypass the audits from the auditor and instead go with a private auditing firm, which is how they're getting away with all of this in the first place. We're going to go and hunt down fraud, and people should be on notice when we get in there that 24/7 we're looking for you.
So Elliott, I just wanted to clarify, what's the limited scope of the state auditor? Like, I don't think that they're in charge of auditing everything that the legislature appropriates, but is it just the counties and municipalities, the money that goes through there, like all the healthcare programs and housing programs and things like that?
So currently in section 609 of our statutes, it really is pretty murky as to what the auditor does, because like I said, these counties can go with an independent auditing firm, and largely they've created those CPA firms overnight, and then that's who they work with to try to fudge numbers and hide what's actually going on. And Julie Blaha just simply accepts those as truth. I think what we need to do is expand the role of the office and just simply say, why in the heck can't we look for fraud wherever it's occurring? I would love to hear somebody say you're exceeding your statutory authority by looking into fraud when it comes to state agencies. Sorry, I'm actually going above and beyond and looking for something. And there's no criminal penalty for showing up and doing a site visit and alerting the public as to what's really going on. So we're going to actually look to expand the role of the office via legislation this upcoming session. And I know Dan Wolgamott, who's running for the same position on the Democrat side, he's already come out and said that he would be in favor of allowing the auditor's office to be expanded to oversee state funds as well as contracted NGO funds, and have prosecutorial refer prosecutorial cases over to our partners. So I'll have that bill ready on day one. He should get his pen out and be the second co-author and prove that he's not just saying all the good things to try to make it seem as if Democrats care about this issue all of a sudden.
So this idea of a county opting to hire a private CPA firm to do their audit as opposed to having the state auditor do their thing. I thought that was the more conservative counties that were doing that because they wanted to, keep St. Paul out of their business. But does Hennepin County also contract with a private CPA firm instead of having the auditor?
Yes, and that's how they're able to spend $10.4 million of FEMA money on housing illegal immigrants. It's because they're playing around with numbers, making it seem as if everything's up to snuff. But in reality, a 22% property tax increase is going directly towards financing room, board, and maid services for hotels in Bloomington that are going to be housing illegal migrants. Well, that's ridiculous. That should be exposed, and we should have somebody that's, wakes up in the morning and looks to actually tell taxpayers where their money's going. So there's a lot of corruption right now in our current government system, and we just need somebody who's trying to break it up and clean it up.
So I think,
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Susan.
I think when, as you mentioned earlier, the state auditor has the ability to literally walk in to any county, right? Any county. And the language is to examine all accounts and records relating to the receipt and disbursement of the public funds. The public funds. It doesn't say state funds. It just says public funds. In essence, they are serving as a guard dog for the people at all levels to watch over these entities. And
100%.
And clearly it says unannounced, right? They literally no notice, because as soon as you tell them, hey, by the way, we're going to come and check it out in a month and a half, be ready, right? Literally no notice, walk into Hennepin County and say, here we are. We're about to start examining every record, right? Has she done that at all? Anywhere, do you know of any county that she's just walked into?
Julie Baja is like a ghost. You only ever see her on the campaign trail like a month before the election when she's running for re-election while overseeing the state's largest fraud scandal issue in recent history. No, they don't do this. They actually, I believe, are a political tool for the fraud. And I think sometimes we like to pretend that this is simply oversights that are allowing this record-breaking fraud to occur. I believe it's incentivized and it's enabled by the legislature and by Democrats because it is helping them in their re-election campaigns. I'm watching as Senator John Hoffman is going to steer $3.5 million towards a nonprofit that he's the executive director of. Well, then those same nonprofits can turn around and write him a campaign check. That's not definitively right now under state statute considered fraud, but it is unethical behavior. And that's something that we should also be working to expose, because largely that's what's allowing this fraud to happen. They're giving money to the politically connected class, and the working class is footing the bill for the fraud to continue and be more pervasive. So we're going to crack down on it in a way that I don't believe has been done before. And I think the DOJ at the federal level kind of showed people just how much bloat there is and how much money is being given out to friends rather than because it's helping any of us. And we're going to look to do that here too.
Well, I think that DOJ also showed us that you can have independent groups come in and assess how much waste and fraud is going on, but the legislature they didn't take action. They did not actually root out, or they didn't write the bills to change everything. They kind of refunded the entirety of government, just nibbling around the edges on a few things where we need some decisive action in the legislature. And we've had the Office of Legislative Auditor, the OLA, highlight massive failures of government, and there hasn't been sweeping reforms in the legislature. Republicans and Democrats just don't like cutting spending, but we need to go after this systematically. You said some words that kind of scare me as a Republican. You said you want to expand the role of this auditor, things like that. To me, that always translates to growing government. But I always have to remind myself that auditing government is something worthwhile, and it's worth the cost to do that. I also point to Republicans as being part of the problem of a lot of this fraud, because originally, 20, 30 years ago, Republicans wanted to privatize so many of these services because the private industry could do it better and more efficiently than government. And so instead of having the government distributing these funds, private companies came in and did it better. But then all of a sudden, the nonprofits run by the Democrats came in there and took over. And now we have this massive fraud and no accountability. So I don't want to say that we should be pushing all these services back into government, but we need to have someone in government like the state auditor that can track down all these dollars and hold people accountable. Yes. And then based on the reporting of what happens, the legislature should be really forced to cut these programs or to change course instead of just listening to the report and then doing nothing.
Well, what's so crazy too is how the legislature prioritizes spending. $2.6 billion in 2023 went to nonprofit organizations. I mean, that's absurd. That's during the time that they raised the state budget by 40%. We have an $18.6 billion surplus, and now we're looking at a $6.8 billion deficit. It's because they wanted to dole out funds as quickly as possible to those friendly organizations and ultimately their dark money campaign arm, and also these fraudulent actors. And so they don't want to talk about it. The legislature, I believe, has a stagnancy issue where change is always bad. Reform always comes with inherent risk because it's not the way that things have been done in the past. But simply abiding by political orthodoxies because they've been prevalent in the past doesn't mean that you should continue to do so in the future if it bears no good result. We don't want to expand the government. We just want to expand what the office does with that $8 million. We don't need a cent more. I've done it for a cumulative total of $0 during the first couple weeks of this campaign. And we've exposed more fraud than Julie Blaha ever has or ever could. She's nothing but a tool for the administration to make it seem as if everything's up to snuff. And that's not the role of the job. It needs to be independent. It needs to call balls and strikes wherever they see it and be working for the taxpayers.
Well, after the break, I'd like to come back and talk about one of the big issues that we're hearing about nationally. In fact, congressmen from other states are even weighing in on this massive fraud within the Somali community. And Ilhan Omar and Keith Ellison's pushback and calling this racism because we're happen to realize that like 90% of the people being charged with fraud are immigrants from Somalia, and kind of get your take on it and how we can address this issue going forward.
We'll be back in just a few minutes. Thanks for listening.
Okay, let's begin.
Welcome back to Political Pitchforks. I am Susan Smith, and I'm here with Jeremy Munson, Elliott Engen, and we are on AM 1280 The Patriot every Saturday morning at 9 a.m., and we appreciate you listening to us. We have great topics this morning, talking about the state auditor race with Elliott, and there are a lot of issues going on about fraud right now, and we just saw Donald Trump. He issued basically an order to end the emergency protection for Somali people. Great headlines, probably not going to have a huge serious effect on that many people, but it's huge headline. And it all goes back to this issue of the fraud that we keep hearing about with the Somali people being connected to fraud in overwhelming numbers. And those issues seem to be growing. It doesn't seem like we're not going to continue to uncover more examples of programmatic abuse. And so, Elliott, I think these are really serious issues for us to talk about. And where do you see these issues going? And I want to be clear, this isn't that all the Somali people are guilty. This is that there's a group of people that are using these programs to funnel money into directions. Yep. And I think oftentimes, culturally, many of those people who are unwittingly used to funnel money to those programs, right? So like autism, right. Parents whose children go to a provider who gives them a label that then begins running money to a program, right?
Yeah.
So why don't you talk a little bit about that and how you think that factors in?
No, I have so much to say on this. What I can't stand is when people use compassion as a guise for corruption. They're going after programs, EIDBI, autism centers. They're going after substance abuse disorder treatments, housing stabilization services for people who can't get a roof over their head. The list goes on and on of the most vulnerable populations who are being stolen from when it comes to programs that are meant to uplift them. It's a safety net, not a hammock, as conservatives would want. But simultaneously, when those programs get shut down because there's a specific community that's engaging in rampant and systemic fraud within them, that does nobody any good. And I would even tell a bleeding heart liberal Democrat that if they want to provide those compassionate services, vote Republican, because right now those services aren't getting to where they're supposed to be going. And it would be absurd to suggest that we can't say that the mafia in New York was predominantly Italian. It was RICO charges against Italians in the 1930s and 40s. It doesn't mean that you're racist for having said so, right? It's just it's being honest. It's being intellectually honest. And if Norwegians were doing this too, we'd call it out. There seems to be a an issue within a specific community, and a community that has been given opportunities, even via, Deed, for example, hosting a Somali startup small business listening session. Like that's a very specific niche. One culture is benefiting from it. So I think we need to just even the playing field and call out fraud wherever we see it, but we're seeing it a lot within one.
Yeah, Elliot, I like to tell people, like, I lived in Minneapolis for 10 years. I rode the bus to work every day, and I would say half the bus was Somali. It went through neighborhoods where there were predominantly Somali immigrants.
Mhm.
I had great conversations with them talking about the Civil War in their country, why they came here. And it really, what I learned was that we think our politicians are corrupt in this country, but our country has probably one of the least amounts of corruption in the world. And you go to countries, especially in Africa, where the government is so corrupt,
Yes.
and the political elite in these countries steal from the government, because so much of the money is coming in from foreign aid. It's not even viewed as their tax dollars. It's just stealing money from the government is openly accepted and expected.
Yeah.
And so when they came here and they see all of these programs with no guardrails on them whatsoever, they stole. Not saying it's an excuse, but it is part of the culture in so many of these corrupt nations. And so when we brought over, we didn't just welcome anybody that was seeking protection. We opened up the doors and actually took the political elite from Somalia. We took all of their leaders, professors, lawyers, and brought them over here because they were the ones with the means to get here because of the corrupt system that they left. And they came over here and have been just pillaging our tax dollars because these programs have very little guardrails, and it's accepted in that culture to steal from government.
Oh, 100%. And I think at the end of the day, what about the Somali families that are actually trying to get services that need them because, maybe their son or daughter actually is autistic, and now they don't have the means to be able to do so because others within the community have pilfered off of those programs. We need to call that out, and I don't think it's compassionate to not do so. I don't think it's racist, bigoted, or hateful to just simply say the truth. And if we crack down on it now, it's reactive. I wish we would have had politicians who were proactive in doing that. But it's just going to benefit everybody if we clean up these programs. It's absurd to suggest that we can't recognize reality when it comes to a specific community engaging in fraud.
Well, what percentage of fraud is acceptable in these programs? Because when I was in the legislature, and the Child Care Assistance Program, also known as CCAP, had over 50% of the dollars being spent in that program, which was like $200 or $300 million a year. The Office of Legislative Auditor had said that over half was fraud. At what point do we just shut the entire program down if it's more than 10% or 20%? What percentage is acceptable to you?
0% is acceptable to me, but what's so crazy is how there were obvious signs that fraud was being sought out and that these dollars were flowing to nobody other than criminals for so long, and nobody said a single damn word. You take a look at housing stabilization services, a 700% increase in provider organizations in a 3-year span, over $300 million in growth when it originally was funded to the tune of $6 million. It's because they need to continue the charade that they're helping people, and if you don't finance and fund and throw more money towards helping people, you must hate them. But in reality, it's just a means to keep those coffers full and grow them so that they can engage in more of it. It wasn't but 3 weeks ago when we went and toured a housing stabilization services office in Hopkins, and we find out that it is Omar Fateh's wife who owns a housing stabilization services organization. We knocked on all those doors. Nobody was there. No services were being provided, and politicians, potentially stood to be in on the cut. That needs to end now. We need somebody who simply doesn't put up with it and calls it out where they see it, and that's what our goal is.
I think this is what this issue right here about simply going to the address.
Yeah.
Right? Simply going to the address and saying, knock, knock, right? How much did that cost? How much would that cost? Right?
$0.
$0.
It cost me $12 in gas. I bought it myself.
And so I think, to me, this is really, it used to be in the United States, the people were more engaged in this process, right? The mailmen were the people that reported fraud because they were delivering 27 checks to a 1-bedroom apartment, right? That not anymore, right? It's like people don't even know these programs exist to even be wondering if there's fraud, right? The average person doesn't even know that these things are. How do you even know as a citizen what to be looking for? Because you don't even know that it happens.
If you know about the fraud, you hear about it so frequently that you become disenfranchised or disenchanted by it. And I think a lot of people can't even wrap their heads around the fact that we have $2 billion as of right now, even though that's just the tip of the iceberg,
Right.
Reported in fraud or known to be fraud. I think that we should be uplifting Minnesotans to also be active partners alongside a state auditor in trying to expose and bring forward cases of fraud or potential fraud. And that should come with an incentive to do so. We can turn bureaucrats into civil servants if they're given a carrot and a stick rather than a stick approach for finding this and reporting it.
So Elliot, one of the problems with that, and I love that approach, giving the employees a percentage of the cut, or allowing them to take that budget and add it into their budget for their department if they find fraud. The problem is that the state employee unions prohibit incentivizing workers or compensating them more than anybody else. So that has been a constant holdout.
Would you have to do it through the agency though, limited to just that, employer? If it's a DHS, for example, could you have a separate pool somewhere else and saying you could recoup these funds that's not alongside your employer for having reported it?
I don't know. I mean, it would be interesting. I know that Kristi Noem got a lot of heat for coming to Minneapolis and giving bonus checks to TSA workers for those who didn't call in sick during the government shutdown. And everybody's criticizing her because the union is saying that you can't do that. You can't give bonuses to our workers.
Well, at the end of the day, we're going to do everything we can. We're going to look for unique and new ways to go about this, because what we have right now simply isn't working. But
yeah, one other thing I wanted to add is that when you have $2 billion in fraud that's been discovered, and most of that money is passed through from the federal government that we redistribute, the federal government demands that money be paid back if it wasn't spent for these programs. And so we didn't just lose $2 billion, we lost $4 billion, because now we have to pay back the federal government for the dollars that we lost. And that should hit people really hard and at least encourage people to stop the fraud from within the administration.
Well, and what's so crazy too is that they will always pass the buck and blame to somebody else when it occurs. Anybody from the state auditor to the current attorney general, Keith Ellison, who's been enabling all of this. It really is sad that we don't have anybody willing to say, I want to do this job and I want to do it well. And it is my responsibility. We're going to do that. We want it to be our responsibility to find and locate and expose fraud, and then dare an attorney general, no matter who it is, Republican or Democrat, to not prosecute it. A lot of people don't know this, but in 2023, in the Judiciary Omnibus Bill, there was a little word change that was put in place, and it changed the duty of the attorney general to shall prosecute known instances of NGO fraud to may. And so they can simply pick and choose when to go after somebody, and ultimately it's just a political weapon to wield against your opponents, rather than about protecting and serving the taxpayers. So we're gonna expose it and make it public knowledge how much corruption's going on, and then dare him to do so.
I want to thank you for listening to Political Pitchforks. We'll be back in just a few moments with more from Elliott's plans to help Minnesota. Thanks.
Okay, let's begin.
Welcome back, Patriot listeners. You're listening to Political Pitchforks with Jeremy Munson and Susan Sjogren-Smith, and today we're interviewing Elliott Engen, candidate for state auditor, a statewide race, very important in this state where we have just ungodly amounts of fraud. Elliott, as I look at the race, our previous state auditor, Julie Blaha, loved her some White Claws, rolled her car at Farm Fest into the ditch drunk. And we have a Democrat running, Dan Wolgamott, who's had now 2 DWIs. How many DWIs have you had that you think qualifies you to be state auditor?
0 DWIs. At the end of the day, Democrats have been drunk at the wheel while overseeing fraud, maybe we should get them an Uber instead of a new office in the auditor's office. So
Great. That's right.
Crazy.
Very, very good. How do you see this race kind of shaping up? And personally, I think if we can unite behind a gubernatorial candidate so that we can get all of our statewide candidates aligned and basically just run them as a slate, talk about all these really important issues statewide, or do you see your race as kind of running independent of the rest of the noise, especially in the gubernatorial race, where you can go around and make inroads with people?
I'll work with anybody. At the end of the day, we need to win. 2026, I believe, is our last opportunity to right the ship. We can either be solidified as a cold California, or even worse, all of the craziest Marxist ideals come out of this state, or we could become a freezing Florida. We could get our books under control. We could prevent the fraud. We could have people know that those serving on their behalf in the legislature and in the constitutional offices have their best interests at heart. Or we could be the same status quo that's broken and everybody knows it. So we're going to go around and we're going to make fraud the biggest issue as we possibly can. We're going to talk to people, not just about, the dollar figure, because sometimes that gets lost. We have to just share via stories how much, Minnesota could be helping you and working class families. 68% are living paycheck to paycheck. And why is that? Because their taxes are financing a niche fraud industry that only the politically well connected and the elite get to engage in. So we'll run with whoever ends up getting that endorsement and goes to November. But we need to do our job and make sure that we're engaging as many people as possible.
How can people reach out to your campaign? Share us the information about your website and how to get involved.
www.elliottenggen.com. It's ELLIOTTENGEN, very Norwegian. Go on our website because we have some pretty cool tools there. Right now we have a fraud reporting hotline for public employees. We've had over 400 submissions to that and we're pouring through them. We're going to be announcing a 30 fraud sites in 30 days tour in the coming days here. It's going to be looking like a concert graphic where you guys can come alongside us. And we're going to go do site visits of places that we have identified as, suspected, fraud that's going on there. Let's break news together. Let's show Minnesotans that they can also be empowered to work alongside us in preventing this and righting the ship here in Minnesota.
As we move towards, I agree with you, the most important elections in Minnesota in decades. I think we're at a tipping point. There's no question about it. And I'm a person who's been talking about fraud in the election system, and the way we run our elections and how we fund our elections, since 2008, since the Coleman recount, and that was just a debacle. And then that opened the door to the absentee ballot boards, which have now, I believe if we were to be able to get an accurate accounting of the dollars spent running elections today, comparing them to how it used to be, people would be stunned and shocked, and we would immediately probably go back to a hand counting system in the precincts, because we are now paying for 45 days of people to do work on behalf of elections. Those are people that are being paid at the county level, county employees. It's now totally secret. We're tabulating votes in violation of the law early. People are getting the data about who's voting, when, and they're able to project where they need voters and where they don't need voters. People have no idea the amount of money we're spending to have our elections stolen by very smart technology people who can break data down instantaneously using even AI now, right, to control the outcome. And I think that all of that is being funded by state and federal dollars that are flowing through counties primarily and cities. And, equipment's being used that's not, so we literally have voting equipment that is running Windows 10. We have systems that haven't been updated in years. Our phones are updated on a weekly basis. People have no idea what's actually going on, how this money is being spent. And so how can the auditor's office provide oversight into this spending that's being done, and the NGOs and the people that are signing everybody? Now everybody should be an absentee voter. Everybody should be a permanent absentee voter, right? Documentation going out. We don't even know who's putting it out.
it's such an erosion of trust that's occurred, right? I mean, people feel hopeless and like they can't change the system. What we know is that there's been a number of laws in my time serving in the legislature that have been passed that continue that erosion. House File 3, the Democrats called it the Protect Democracy Act in 2023. It was the Protect Democrats Act in reality.
Mob rule.
Exactly what, and it allowed for that same ballot harvesting that they always had said they weren't doing and weren't engaged in. They have nonprofits that are going around and doing a collect them all scheme. And right now that's the letter of the law in this state. So if we want to correct that, if we want to, get our elections back to just being about who's best fit to serve the people and letting the chips fall where they may, we first must have to recognize the letter of the law and abide by it and beat them at their own game before restoring integrity to it. And that's what I keep telling Republicans is we don't want to be reactive. We don't want to be searching out potential issues after the fact, because I'm sorry that it's not going to change anything. Keith Ellison would have to take up the case if there were allegations of misconduct that went forward. I don't think that he's going to do that. So we should be proactive in trying to find ways to win elections, govern, and make sure that this is thrown into the dustbin of history where it belongs. But back to the state auditor's office. I remember seeing a letter that really didn't go too far from the federal government saying that they would be, they'd be stopping all payments to the Secretary of State's office for voting equipment after they were contracting with NGOs that weren't reporting properly. They were giving money to specific counties and allowing those county auditors to have mobile voter events or civic engagement seminars where they're only in specific communities with certain people who they believe are going to be voting a predominant way. That's ridiculous. If they're doing mobile voter events, why aren't they ever happening outside of a Baptist church in Goodhue County? They're only ever happening in the heart of Minneapolis at some festival or something like that. It's really a sad system because it's trying to show voters that they care about voter engagement, but they don't. They only care about voter engagement with the right people.
Yeah. Elliott, I was going to ask you about your plan for engaging with the younger generation of voter, and it reminded me I need to plug an event on Monday. I'm the main speaker at a Turning Point chapter in Mankato at the University of Minnesota, or Mankato State University, and talking about basically voter engagement, how to get involved in politics, how to go to caucus, and to teach kids from all political spectrums on how to get involved. And this is a great type of an event where I could see you engaging with voters. Yeah. But what's your plan? Are you going around at being a former Turning Point chair? Are you going to go around to college campuses and high schools and stuff and talking to kids and how to get involved?
100%. That's what we've been doing since day one. If you take a look at the 2024 election, there were some numbers that were pretty hopeful for us. The largest swing towards conservatism in American history occurred within Gen Z. They were plus 20 for Joe Biden. They just went for Donald Trump by 1.8. That's a massive turn. And that's not to say that they're conservative, but that they want change and they want reform. We need to lean into that. We need to continue to engage the youth vote because it's now the largest electorate in the nation. And people want to see that change, but we need to go and speak to them where they're at, whether it's online. I just joined TikTok not too long ago, and I never once thought I would do that. But we need to reach them where they are and then go and speak to them on college campuses.
So it's really important. I want to make a point about college students because we only have a minute left. It is really critical to understand that we've passed a law that tells college students they can vote on campus, but that's not really the whole truth. And even Steve Simon doesn't say that. You cannot vote as a college student at your college unless that is your legal permanent residence, which means you need to change your address to that college dorm room. You go ahead and try and do that. You cannot make that be your permanent address because you don't permanently live there. College students need to vote at their permanent address listed on their I-9 form list. That is their address. And we are telling these students to vote and change communities where they don't live, where they are in essence tourists or visitors. And we need to tell them to change their address or get an absentee ballot and do it right. Steve Simon will tell them it's their decision where they vote. He won't tell them they can vote there. And we need to educate those students about what they need to do. And I'm sorry, we're running out of time. Elliott, you are phenomenal. Jeremy, go tell those college students to vote at their right address. And we'll be back next week for more great Minnesota news and national news. And Elliott, best of luck to you.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. Appreciate it.